Frank Lampard's managerial career has already been a roller coaster, and it hasn't even been around that long. From Derby County to Chelsea, Everton, back to Chelsea, now down to the Championship, right from his playing career into coaching, it has been a wild ride, and at some point, he's going to be linked with Premier League jobs again. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, has he actually gotten better as a manager? We're going to talk about that next, here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub. Frank Lampard's managerial career has been a study in contrast, from golden boy player immediately into coaching, some success at Derby County, Chelsea, some success, some failure, a relegation scrap with Everton, disaster coming back to Chelsea, and now he's having success again in the Championship at Coventry. And of course that means he's at some point going to be linked with a Premier League job, or possibly even bring Coventry there himself next year after almost making it this year. And so, of course, we have to talk about his styles, his tactics, where he failed in the past, and we gotta see if he's actually gotten better, or is Coventry just a loaded team where he's having some success? What has changed? What hasn't? Where were his successes earlier? Where were his failures? And where has he grown, if at all, since leaving the Premier League and going down to the Championship level? So that's what we're gonna break down here today. But before we do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel. Get down in the comment section. Do you think that Lampard's gotten better as a manager? Would you want him for your club? And if so, what club is that? How high of a club do you think he's ready for? Get in that comment section. Let me know your thoughts. You can also leave some comments on Twitter and Blue Sky at Pitchside Pub, and check out the website pitchsidepub.com. Now, he started his career at Derby County almost immediately after being done playing, and he had some success. They were fun to watch, attacking, high pressing. But if you look closer, there were some cracks in the facade. He gave up 54 goals in league play. The defense was sort of a mess. And so, yeah, they were fun, they were energetic, and they had some success, but it probably wasn't a sustainable model. This, of course, did not stop Chelsea, who wanted to have a club legend come back and lead them, a big name, a star player from their club's history, and he, was having success and looked like he might be the next young up-and-coming managerial legend. And unfortunately, he was really thrown into the fire at Chelsea, and it was a tough time at Chelsea. This was during the transfer ban. They had just lost Eden Hazard, and so he really came into a tough situation, and credit where it's due, and I think we have forgotten this because of some of his since failures, but Frank Lampard had a really good run when he got to Chelsea. They had very little investment to help him out, and so he integrated young players. Mason Mount, Tammy Abraham, Reece James, all got their debuts under Frank Lampard, and they had success. His first season, he got them to 4th place. He got them to a Champions League spot. And so with that team, with very little investment, having lost your best player in Eden Hazard, that has to be looked at as a success. And integrating young talent is nothing to really write off. That is a major skill that not all managers have. And so he did get off to a good start at Chelsea, but it quickly went downhill the following summer. They were able to spend again $200 million investment that summer, and he really failed to integrate those stars into his system. All of a sudden, his tactics were getting questioned, his midfield was getting exposed, he was adamant that he was going to stick to the 4-3-3, and it was just getting lit up and they were dropping points. And even when he was pressed on it, he doubled down, and the inflexibility to change is one of the things that has cost Lampard so far. But when he was pressed on it, he said, "I've heard some people talk about the system with 2-8s as though they have to run in straight lines. These players arrive between the lines, and that can be more dangerous than a number 10 that just stands there all day." You have to give him credit for at least believing in what he was doing, but he didn't seem to want to believe the points that were being dropped. He refused to change. He was adamant on his style, and it simply wasn't working. So he was relieved of his duties. Thomas Tuchel comes in, takes that club to a Champions League victory, which makes Lampard look even worse because clearly the club had talent and he was not making the most of it. So the inability to change was one major knock on Lampard. Now, some knocked his tactics in general, but it's not the tactics necessarily, it's the inflexibility. They worked the first year, they were no longer working. The league began to figure him out. He got new players that didn't integrate well in it. So it's not just as simple as, oh, his tactics don't work or he doesn't know tactics. It's that rigidness that got him in trouble. So next he goes to Everton, and of course, that's a whole different situation because it's a relegation relegation battle, and fighting for your life in a relegation battle is really tough. It's hard to integrate tactics, it's hard to manage the players. You are just fighting for your life. And so he was let go when they were in 19th on the cusp of relegation, and of course they ended up surviving, which again did not make him look that good, but that was a really tough situation for him to be in, and so it's really hard to gauge his coaching ability in a situation like that. So then he goes back to Chelsea as a caretaker, and he probably thought that was going to be a chance to redeem himself and a chance to work his way back in at Chelsea. But one win in 11 games, gave up a ton of goals, and it just didn't work. He doubled down even more on the high pressing, the 4-3-3, and really trying to make that work and force the issue, and it was just a disaster that led to him being let go at the end of the season. And so at this point, you're looking at Frank Lampard, and you sort of just make that assumption that he was the big name. He was hired for his name, and he really didn't have the tactical nuance or the man management or something. Something was missing, right? And that the name wasn't enough to get by. So Lampard didn't exactly inherit a juggernaut at Coventry City, which he took over mid-season. They were languishing in the table and underperforming when he came in, but rather than force his same tactics that he had used at Chelsea, that he had used at Everton, that he had tried at Chelsea again, he made some adjustments, and that's the key that I want to talk about here when we try to figure out if Lampard can work things out in the Premier League in the future. So he gets to Coventry and he implements a 4-2-3-1, which is very similar to a 4-3-3, although it has some nuanced differences depending on the personnel. But the point is that he made some adjustments, and Coventry City was better for it. And then to make matters worse, injuries hit, and Lampard actually switched to a back three, which was a massive adjustment from any previous tactics that he had used in the past. And he had to explain it by referencing the injuries. And he said, we're playing really well in a 4-3-3. Then we lost Efron Mason-Clark with injury, which left me with only one experienced winger, and we had to change. If we didn't change, I don't think the team would have been as strong. So we changed, adapted, and played a back three. Now we've gone back to a 4 again. So my point is, a modern manager can be adaptable. You can be a modern manager and not just have one set way of playing. Now that feels fairly obvious, but that's a really monumental thing for Frank Lampard to say, because his inability or unwillingness to change is where he fell apart at previous jobs. This was brought up at Chelsea. He was pushed hard by the media on changing his tactics, and he staunchly refused. He doubled down and said, no, this way is going to work, and it ended up getting him fired. So for him to actually come out and say, well, a modern manager has to be adaptable and make these changes, that's a major step for him, and it worked. The defense shored up, the offense became more efficient, and the goals started coming in. The statistical impact was pretty clear. Under Lampard, Coventry's XG per shot rose from 0.1 to 0.14, a 40% increase in average shot quality. Now that may not sound like a lot on paper, but that's the difference between 1 out of every 10 shots going in versus 1 out of every 7 shots. So that's much more efficient. You're taking better shots, you're creating better chances, and thus you're leading to more goals scored. It helped on defense as well. They conceded fewer goals per game and looked more structurally sound when Lampard shifted to a back three, and then they kept that progress going even when they went back to a back four after some of the players returned from injury. This is not just a run of good form. This is proof that a manager has made actual tactical adjustments to help his team improve, and given Lampard's history, that is a massive step forward. But it's not just the tactics that have changed. Lampard's man management appears different as well. At Chelsea, he was applauded for his integration of young players, and he seemed to get along well with them. But there were reports of him butting heads with some of the older players, a few of which he had actually played with, and that he relied on his inner circle far too much. At Everton, it's hard to gauge because a relegation battle makes man management really difficult. Everyone's just fighting to survive, everyone's looking around to see who's going to be there next year, and everyone's sort of fighting for themselves. So man management at a relegation squad is incredibly difficult. Then again, as a caretaker at Chelsea, you know you're not there that long, so managing the dressing room can be a real chore. But at Coventry, it appears to be a little bit different. Casey Palmer called him a great man manager, and the dressing room seems to agree. Players have talked about the openness in the environment, more communication, more ownership. Lampard has celebrated wins in the dressing room, letting players choose music for training and encouraging autonomy within the squad. Again, these seem like simple things, but this is a guy who was known for being overly rigid in the dressing room. Very strict rules, harsh punishments for being late and missing things, the sort of stuff that you can do when you're winning but starts to really alienate your players when you lose. So things turn bad as soon as the goals stopped going in. Lampard appears to have taken a different approach here, and he even addressed it. Lampard said, "When the team is united and everyone is working towards the same goal, it becomes so much easier to perform at your best." Now that sort of philosophy may be easier when you're in the Championship as opposed to the pressure cooker of Chelsea or a relegation battle at Everton, but nevertheless, that mentality is a big change for Lampard, and it is something he can take to his next stops, even if he's back in the Premier League. So when we talk about the ability to adjust, and we talk about being a little bit more of a player's manager, he does appear to have made two actual fundamental changes to the way he manages a club that are worth noting. So has he actually gotten better? Well, those kinds of changes don't all of a sudden make him Jurgen Klopp or Pep Guardiola, but they could be the difference between success and failure. We know that Lampard knows the game, we know that he knows the tactics, but it was his stubbornness and his overly tough mentality that got him into trouble. He refused to change his tactics, and he refused to loosen up and let the players play and live a little bit, and that got him run out of Chelsea not once but twice. So if he did fundamentally change those things, and if he can take those philosophies from Coventry to his next job in the Premier League, or possibly with Coventry in the Premier League if they get promoted, then yes, that is a sign that he could be a better manager the next time around. It's not like Coventry was overvalued and should be dominating the Championship. He overachieved slightly with a squad valued around 87 million euros, good for around 8th in the Championship. But they've outperformed their underlying metrics, a clear sign that Lampard's tactical decisions and leadership are helping them exceed expectations. That would be a good sign for a Premier League club that doesn't have a massive budget, a mid-table team who may have had their manager poached by one of the bigger clubs. I don't think going right back to a Big Six job is a great move for Lampard, and frankly they'd have to be available. Which ones are going to be available? Tottenham is a dicey situation, Manchester United is a dicey situation. Those jobs are not real attractive for a manager who may be on his last chance in the Premier League. But if Bournemouth or Fulham should come available because those managers get poached, or Brentford, that could be a nice landing spot for a manager like Lampard, who is looking to reestablish his credibility and now has proven that he can overachieve with a mid-table level squad, albeit at the Championship level. But clearly this is a Premier League pedigree player and a coach that many clubs thought could coach at that level. It is great to see him go down and learn some of the more nuanced managerial tactics that go into coaching. Lots of star players jump right from their career into coaching. Some succeed immediately and go on to be some of the best coaches in the world. Others are abject failures and never learned how to coach. But what we don't see very often is one go in, have some success, have some failure, go back down to a lower level, regroup, adjust, and learn, and come back as a different manager. And that's something that could be happening with Frank Lampard. I would love to see him get another chance at some point. If it doesn't happen this summer, it would have to be the right situation this summer. If not, going back to Coventry and having a full season there and attempting to replicate that success, perhaps build on it and get promoted, would be an incredible story. For Frank Lampard to return to the Premier League at the helm of Coventry City would be amazing. But if not, if he has another season with some success, I do expect Premier League clubs to come calling, and somewhere in that middle of the table could be a great landing spot for Lampard. What do you think? Would you want Frank Lampard coaching your club? What club is that? Where do you think is a good landing spot for him? Get down in that comment section. Let me know your thoughts. You can also leave some comments on Twitter and Blue Sky at Pitchside Pub. While you're at it, make sure you hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel, and check out the website pitchsidepub.com. Thanks as always for joining us here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub.